Good morning and welcome to Roguelike Radio. This is episode 11 where we're looking at The Binding of Isaac. Today we have
Ido Yehieli,
Strømme,
and I'm Andrew Doull. And we're also joined by Edmund McMillen, who's the lead designer and artist for The Binding of Isaac.
Hello.
The traditional question we ask is actually how far everyone has got in the game so far. Ido?
Well, I almost got to Mom. I got to what's that level called? The Depth 2.
Yeah.
And at about that time, the game got crazy difficult, and I got killed twice. I think I probably played maybe 50 seconds of the game.
Oddmund?
Yeah, I've played 35 hours. I've beaten Mom's heart once, and I just got the pinking shares, so I've died over 100 times.
I've played about 6.5 hours. I made it to Depths 1. I've unlocked Cain, Magdalene and Eve. Loving it, really enjoying it. Strongly considering this to be a possible candidate for my game of the year.
Wow. I've 100% of the game, guys, I have to say.
Yeah, but you just hack the files though, don't you?
Nope. It's all legit. I don't play it like that. And I actually, this is funny because I didn't realize, I thought everybody did it this way, and I didn't realize people didn't until TIG Jam, which I recently went to. And there were people talking about certain aspects of their games that were too hard for them to beat. And no, I don't do that. No, I only add things in the game if I can do it myself. And if I can't, then I don't add it. And so, yes, I have 100% of the game. Legitimately, it's also good for testing. I have to test the hell out of everything that I do. And the same thing with Meat Boy or any other game I've done. I never put something in that I can't do myself or don't do myself. Once I've done it legitimately once, I do hack it for testing because you have to repeatedly test. But I always legitimately do it at least once.
I think you can pretty much divide roguelikes into those people who have beaten their own roguelike versus those people who haven't. And unfortunately, I'm one of the people who hasn't. I think the Dreadmore guys fall into the same category from the interview we did with Gaslamp Games.
I honestly had no idea. I feel like a fool because I feel like I thought that every designer beats the games they make. I had no idea. And it was actually, I think it was Derek Yu, where I was like, I don't want to spoil anything of the game, but there's a very hard parts of that game, obviously, and there's a part where he informed me he had not beaten yet. And I'm like, what? I thought you had to. I thought this was an unspoken rule with designers, that you have to be able to beat your own game in order to put it out. But I was wrong.
Yeah, it's in the honor code.
I can't bring myself to do it, honestly. I feel like I'm somehow... I feel like that there's a possibility that if I don't do it myself, that there's a way that it's not beatable. I don't know. It's like a paranoid thing, I think. But I have to do it in order for me to put it in. It's just a rule with me, I guess. So yes, I've done it all.
I actually tried to put up a blog post the other day which tried to be a little more, I don't know, talk about themes a little bit more, but I don't think it came out quite right.
I think it was fine. I think you brought up some pretty interesting aspects, or at least I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of thick, but the theme, which seems to be what everybody's talking about, it didn't really play a huge part of the game for me. I was just playing it like an arcade shooter kind of game, and I never gave much thought about the fact that it's like an abused child and all kind of meaty corpses and stuff like that.
So you didn't get really disturbing dreams?
The one influence it had on my sleep is that I was humming the theme songs all the time because the music is just really good and it's really catchy.
I was gonna say you'd be surprised what you can get away with. Just any theme in a video game is accepted, regardless of what it is.
We had a few people go who normally do this podcast go, "Oh, the theme's a bit much for me. I think I might pass this episode." Well, there's two things about the theme. The first one is that it's not about abused kids. It's about the way the media deals with the idea of abused kids, if that makes any sense. I mean, Edmund, you've talked elsewhere specifically about it's around all those 80s Christian videos.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think also the important thing to remember with the game is that it's not... there are a lot of things that inspire it that I've mentioned a lot, but the actual game itself dances around the idea of a lot of different aspects of what's going on and the possibility that this is all
a dream
situation. Yeah, this is all a preoccupation of, possible just religious aspects being around. Just different religious themes that impact the child, not necessarily abuse.
I can't think of any other games that have dealt with certainly Christianity in this way. I know JRPGs have a tendency of taking Christian themes and turning it into some sort of weird cultural artifact.
Not many games. I mean, a lot of games use biblical story as inspiration and theme in their game, but I guess not to my knowledge, there hasn't been many games. The idea of Christianity as just I don't know. It's very American Christian.
Yeah, but it's about as much about the practice of religion as it is about the actual biblical story, isn't it? Yeah. Taking the old adage of sparing the rod and spoiling the child, not realizing that's not actually a comment about child discipline, it's a comment about making sure you set standards to your child. But the literal interpretation of the Bible suddenly turns it into this, yes, you're allowed to beat your children. I grew up in a Catholic family, and the other side of my family, my dad's side of the family, they were all born-again Christian, so I had these kind of two extreme sides, which were both cut from the same cloth in a way, but very opposite in a lot of different ways. They both thought that they were right and the others were wrong, yet they both believed the same thing. And there's just so much going on. Like, there was this almost legend, it's like the fairy tales I was told as a kid were all these religious-based fairy tales, and the things that I was seeing and going on, they were all considered totally fine, right? Because it's religious and it's what people believe, and they believed it to be real. But in reality, it was like pretty odd, to have like a bleeding face of a dying man on your wall when you're little. It's very dark and weird. I mean, in other ways, I embrace these things because this is the reason why I am the way I am today, and why I have obvious, obsessions with, sacrifice and, mutilation and all that other stuff. And I think why a lot of people accept violence is because it's, when you grow up Catholic, violence is considered godly in a way, especially self-sacrifice. So I just grew up with a lot of this really odd dogma and legend and fairy tale, and it all was, mildly real to me growing up, and I wanted to do something where I could pull from that, and that's what came out. And it doesn't have like a definitive answer for anything. I'm not talking about one aspect of anything. It's more or less, my ideas and experiences growing up, kind of, it's like presented in kind of like a dreamlike state, like dream logic, I guess. It's not, there's not a definitive answer to anything.
I mean, if I have to put Binding of Isaac in a genre, it is kind of an arcade game. It's kind of an interesting choice for a game that tells a fairly personal story.
Well, for me, it was... See, so the whole idea from the beginning was I just wanted to make a roguelike Zelda. That was it. That was the basic design. So it's like, I knew I wanted to play around with the roguelike formula, and I thought it would be really cool to do a Zelda. Like, my first ideas was like, oh, well, Zelda has like a structure that could really be used with a roguelike formula, and I think it could work really well. It seemed to go together so well that I just had to do it. And I was playing around with roguelike ideas for another game I'm working on now, and I prototype them, so I thought I'd just do a little small game. And when starting it, so I basically had those two themes that I wanted to do, and that was roguelike Zelda. So since it looks like Zelda, I wanted to have a Zelda feel, but more along the lines of my interpretation of what Zelda was when I was young. And when I was young, Zelda was it had a huge impact on me. I really loved that game. And it wasn't just the game play, but it was the idea of a single child. It just seemed like it just reminded me a lot of me when I was little, like a kid going out and exploring and having an adventure. And it seemed, the first Zelda very much seemed like a kid who was kind of in his imagination going around and fighting, all these things and becoming a hero and getting stronger and turning over rocks and finding, items. And when I was little, I used to do the exact same thing. I'd just wander out in the woods and, find little animals and sticks, swords, and, I think most boys probably do that.
Well, that was Miyamoto's original inspiration for Zelda, was going out and finding a cave in the woods.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally what it is. I mean, and it felt like that to me immensely. And there's also a dark side to that. And there's a dark side to being a creative kid who's isolated and alone. And I wanted to play up that. I wanted to play up the dark side of what I interpreted Zelda as, as a kid. And that was kind of like the loneliness and the, I guess, anxiety ridden, all that sort of stuff. I mean, those things kind of run throughout all my games, but that's basically what I was touching on. It just pulled me into the time I was playing Zelda was like 8, and where I was then and what I was doing, and obviously wasn't ritualistically abused in any way, and I didn't really have an overbearing mother whatsoever, but I just pulled on different little aspects of things that I was familiar with, even if it was, just stories that I heard growing up. I pulled a lot from stories that my family told me about my father's family, and they were kind of messed up in a religious way, and I pulled from that too. Some of the darker stuff came from that. But more or less just stuff you hear. I mean, there's also, what was that, what was her name? Casey Anthony, around that time. That's when I was doing it with that woman who was accused of killing her daughter. That was around that trial when I was working on this, and it's just kind of, all these kind of things just fell into place.
Were you estranged from your father's family?
Mm-hmm.
Or your father?
Honestly, it was, growing up, when I was 5, my mom and dad got divorced and the family split. I was never really that close with my dad, and it was mostly because I had major differences with my father's family, and I just always felt really out of place. They were very religious, born again, AA type people, and there was just countless times. I remember like the last time I went over for a Thanksgiving was I had my magic cards with me, and I had them taken away, and I got told that I was going to go to hell if I continued to play Magic, and these really bizarre lectures of how, like, I couldn't, if I wanted to, I could not kill him. Or this is my uncle talking to me. He's a missionary in, like, Fiji and stuff. It's pretty crazy. But just weird shit, just haunting stuff. As a kid, you get told and makes you question everything. And, yeah, I mean, it's where I probably pull a lot of the darker religious stuff from. Just things that I heard from that side of the family.
The reason I asked that is I think the one thing that I felt was missing from this Binding of Isaac, as opposed to the original Binding of Isaac story, was the relationship between the father and the child. And that kind of, I'm a full-time parent myself. I'm at home looking after twins, because making it a relationship between the mother and child, kind of, I've seen mentioned in a couple of places, sort of an accusation of misogyny, and I don't think that's the case here. There's, to me, it felt more like there's kind of horror movie cliches, about the overbearing mother and Brain Dead, the movie, which was titled Dead Alive in the States, was very much in that same kind of vein.
Yeah, I've been accused of misogyny quite a few times, actually. And then I am not a misogynist, but if it makes people feel better to think so, that's fine.
Yeah, it doesn't come across here at all. I mean,
I actually went into this thinking, like, right away once I had the themes in place, thinking, this is something that the same people who called me a misogynist before are going to grab onto and accuse me of again. But for me, it's one of those things where I know when I start trying, when I feel the need to self-censor, I go the opposite direction, and then I know that what I'm doing has something to it. I don't know if that makes sense, but the direction I go, like if I start going, maybe I shouldn't do this, maybe this is going to make me look bad or whatever, and then I take a step back and think, why do I feel that way? Maybe this is important. So I left it. But yeah, you're right, though. I mean, I think it's an American thing, too. I don't know, it might be over there. But it's over here, those kind of stories are pretty common. I mean, you always see the abusive father, but in the news and stuff, it's pretty common for, like, when, there's a lot of stories growing up of, mothers killing their kids and hearing God telling them to do so. I think it's more common than fathers.
Have you seen the movie Frailty?
Yeah, I've seen Frailty.
Yep. Because that was the other one that sort of sprung to mind as
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably pulling from a shitload of different things. I know, like, Psycho and Ed Gein story and all that sort of stuff. There's multiple things I'm probably pulling at it, but I don't think there's a definitive reason other than the fact that it seemed more interesting to me than having a father or maybe less familiar. I don't know.
Yeah. What really spoke to me incredibly about this, in terms of the way it related to the gameplay mechanic, is the way that the items in the game have almost been given these arbitrary abilities, but they've been given them in the way that, two kids playing would say, oh, this toy does this toy does that, and kind of fundamentally to me brought out the way that, we as game designers make games. We just, it's not a cliche of a +1 sword, it's, a dead cat. And how do you make a dead cat mean something? Well, the way you make the dead cat mean something is exactly the same way that two kids playing together would make a Barbie doll mean something.
Yeah, and it went with the theme of the imagination. A kid with a vivid imagination who's, that's the way I play around with things when I was little. It's quite literally it. Like, this thing allows me to float around, or this does this, and whatever. I try my best to make all the themes bleed into one another, so it feels cohesive. And most people, if they don't even think about it, the thing that I find most important about all these aspects is the fact that, right now we're talking about pretty heavy things. And not surprisingly, I really appreciate this interview because I never really talk about this sort of stuff much. It's mostly just, basic question play and whatever else. But I think the important thing is to realize that, as mentioned in the start of this interview, not that many people go in and care about these aspects. They mostly see it as odd, and they enjoy the gameplay, and they don't need to think about these things in order to enjoy the game. But there are people who do enjoy picking these things apart and appreciate them, and they get, a different thing from the game when they leave. And I try my best to make games in a way where you can kind of take what works for you and leave the rest, because I don't think people need to really think a lot about the themes in the game and why I did them and where I'm coming from in order to enjoy the game at all. But it's there if they want it.
Yeah, I think one advantage it does have to people like me who actually came to the game mostly in terms of gameplay, that there's this huge amount of existing conceptions about what stuff does in games. Like, I experienced it on my own flesh with my own game where, people who play roguelikes or people who played Zelda or people who played whatever game you might have been inspired by are used to things being a certain way. And if it's different than the way that they're used to, then they start complaining and it's really like, Zelda does that and that and that, or in every RPG you have the warrior and the cleric and the fighter and the thief and whatever. And the fact that you took, in a way, your characters are still the usual D&D warrior, wizard, cleric, and thief, but because it's themed in a totally different way, you kind of get around people's initial conceptions of what the things mean in games. Like you could make the thief do that a thief in D&D might not do, and people would not expect it to be different because it's not a thief; it's Cain.
Yeah, exactly. The character themes too initially came from my realization that the 4 base classes in D&D are very tied to the 4 suits of the tarot. I don't know if you guys are into tarot cards much, but the 4 suits of the tarot, they mirror the 4 strengths of each character and of the main classes in D&D: thief, fighter, cleric, wizard. And I just thought that was super interesting. I always thought it was super interesting, and I like to mirror those things I find interesting in games, and it was pretty easy to do with this. Not literally, but it's there. I feel like most people don't necessarily see it, but they know. I don't know. There's something about adding stuff, not literally adding it. Like I never want to say that in the game that Cain is the thief, but it's there, and I think most people kind of sense it, or people who know D&D will probably get it. But if they don't, it doesn't really matter. But I definitely pulled from a shitload of different aspects of different things, and it's all stuff that it's video game tropes, really. The stuff we grew up with that we don't question. And I just try to present it in a slightly different way, so it's not so boring. I get bored easy, and I hate seeing the same thing over and over and over again in the same literal ways.
You were too young to be playing Dungeons and Dragons during the 80s, though.
No, I played Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s.
Oh, that's good.
For sure. I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 80.
I played D&D in the 90s, but it was still the old D&D.
Yep.
Because money to buy the books, so I just got the old one from the library.
You know what it was, too? It was, for me, D&D, like I mentioned before, like, half of my family repeatedly told me how evil it was. So there was a sense of, and this is also in the game, there's a sense of the things that are evil being very tempting and interesting. I want to know why. As a kid, I'm questioning my boundaries and the reasons why I can and can't do things. So right away, when I'm told that this is bad and wrong and evil, I'm very intrigued by it, and I definitely moved towards it because I was so interested in what was so bad about it. And there's something about, especially the monster manual, like first monster manual I bought when I was really young, was magical about it. It seemed so cool and creative and neat and everything, but there was also to it for some reason. It doesn't make sense now, but back then there was, and that's also very in the game. But yeah, I was one of those kids that I loved D&D, but I never got to play a legitimate game because no one could ever get together and actually sit down and play a real game. All my friends would just goof off and start trying to fuck different things and so on. But so I was the kind of person who I always wanted to be the DM, and I came up with these cool campaigns. And yeah, I mean, I'm a game designer, so it makes sense. It's kind of the direction I was going. But I definitely wanted to be the kind of creative person who's orchestrating these cool events and creating a cool game. But I could never really hang out with enough people that liked the game enough to really pay attention to what I was doing. So I ended up just making campaigns that never got played. But I had fun doing it.
One of the original inspirations for roguelikes has to have been that, I want to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Certainly the original Rogue was written so that the guys who wrote it could play their own game of D&D without necessarily having to have a DM or anything like that.
Yeah, that's totally there.
Or other people.
I can totally see that.
Yep. And you actually come across in a couple of other interviews as sounding like you've had a huge amount of fun with The Binding of Isaac. I guess the question I've got is, do you play it still? Do you play it as much or more than some of the other games you've written?
No, designing it, I played it. I mean, everything I'm working on, I usually play a lot. So I can't really say that I played it more or less than anything else. My wife plays The Binding of Isaac, and she's actually one of the reasons why I did the Halloween update, because she had already, once she 100% of the game, or basically 100% of the game, I wanted to see her. I don't know. I really enjoy watching her play it, and I wanted to give her more content. So I did the Halloween update because she had already cleared everything that she could possibly do in the game, and I wanted to make something really hard for her to do. And now she's already beaten Satan with 3 of the 6, so she's on her way.
So we'll be getting a Christmas update.
I have an update dreamed up, but I don't know if and when I'll ever do it. But it'll definitely add some more content to the game. But yeah, I really like playing the game. I really like making the game a lot. I love roguelikes, and I've said it in interviews before, but using a roguelike formula in a game is really, really fun because of the ability to play your own game and have it surprise you. It's really cool. It's like a magical experience. And that's why I'm going to be, the next game I work on is going to have roguelike elements as well, because I just can't get enough.
One thing that really impressed me about it is it has a ton of content in it. And not only does it have a ton of content, but it has a ton of meaningful content. It's not just, like sword and sword +1 and sword +2 and then sword +2 +3 versus orcs or whatever. And at the same time, it's a game that you've made in 3 months, which is extremely quickly for a game that really has a ton of content in it. So my question is how, or what do you think about that, like on terms of time scale? Is it a small game for you? Is it a quick game, or is it a game that you consider one of the larger scale ones?
Oh no, it's definitely a quick game. It's definitely a small quick game. I mean, it's bigger than all the Flash games I've done in terms of overall work put in. Maybe I don't know. It's smaller than the console like Gish or I think it's third in scale of anything that I've done. But it was very quickly made. I made it in 3 months, and it was supposed to be much smaller when I started. It's just one of those things where you fall in love with a project, and it's hard to stop. I'm definitely a workaholic, so when I'm enjoying it, it's hard to not just stop myself. I have a tendency to keep going, and usually have to set deadlines for myself, so I do stop. Because especially with this, like when you keep adding more content, and like I said, like I've got a good 3 pages of content that would actually make the game twice as rich, like twice the amount of content, not just in terms of items, but in terms of the whole game. Make it twice the amount of content, so it would be that much more lush. I'd say, more random happenings and everything else make the game seem more magical. And that was one of the things that really appealed to me when making the game, was how I could trick myself with stuff that I wrote. Like, it's kind of weird. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a small project for me. That's one of the reasons why I charge $5 for it. I only put 3 months in, so it just didn't seem fair for me to, charge much more than that. But there is a lot of content there. But it also is presented in a way that's not that hard for me to implement. I mean, for items, it's quite literally, I draw 2 images, draw 3 heads, and tell Florian what abilities need to be in the game, and then we just do some basic testing with balancing, and it's in. So those are pretty easy, especially if they copy an existing item that just has modded stats or something like that. Even enemies and bad guys are pretty easy to implement.
So what other roguelites have you played?
The one I played the most traditional roguelike-wise is probably Crawl, Stone Soup, which is probably one of my favorites. That's probably it. I tried to get into NetHack. It just didn't jive with me that well. I'm into the non-traditional ones more. I mean, I like Spelunky a lot, Diablo, Desktop Dungeons. Played a little of the Pokemon roguelikes. They're alright. And that's basically it.
Whereabouts do you fall on the debate about calling games like Spelunky and Desktop Dungeons roguelike-likes? Like or dislike?
I don't really care. Before the game came out, whenever I would get news posts, it would become this big argument of, using the word roguelike in a way that hardcore fans weren't happy with because it wasn't exactly what they wanted. I don't really care. I mean, you can call it whatever you want. I don't like calling it a roguelike-like, and it probably is just because that's a suggestion that people that have upset me have suggested. So it's more of an annoyance. I don't really care what you call it. It's a game with roguelike elements. I think that anybody with half a brain knows that if I say that it's a roguelike shooter, that it's not a traditional roguelike.
To me, feels more like roguelike than the Spelunky or Desktop Dungeons. It's because it's got the identify system in there, where pills.
It does. Yeah, it does have a lot. It does have a lot more roguelike elements. It isn't. I'm not trying to argue, and people would always chime in before the game was out that your game's not roguelike. Stop calling it that. You're making yourself look like an ass. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, they give me a list. Like literally give me a checklist from Wikipedia that said, in order to be a roguelike, your game must have at least 80% of these qualities. My game had those qualities. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. I pulled so much from these elements. Like, that's where, the core foundation of the game came from. And I'm pulling from all these things except for turn-based. And, that was the thing, that seemed to upset him the most. But, yeah, no, I pull a shitload from roguelikes. I wouldn't call it a roguelike if I didn't believe that it had major elements from it. You need those things in order to create the magic, that makes a roguelike good. So I did.
I think it's really harmful for indie games or games in general to even pigeonhole games into genres like that, because eventually we want to get beyond that, and we want to improve with time. And if it says a game is an RPG, and then everybody's gonna say, okay, but an RPG has classes and it has experience points and it has blah blah blah, and maybe experience points isn't something so good, so I'm not gonna have it in my game. But then, but it's an RPG. So it's not really an RPG if it doesn't have experience points. So it's the same like that with the roguelike and turn-based or whatever. It does more harm than it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just a means of segregation, and any kind of segregation is not a good thing. It's just a fucking game. Enjoy it. People get so weird about that. It's a team thing. They're on Team Roguelike, and everybody else is the enemy. And if it's not how they want it, then it's, it's just a weird, I guess, just a nerd thing, maybe. I love roguelikes, but I am also a designer, and I understand why roguelikes aren't mainstream. There's a reason why. It's because they're very alienating. You need to understand a lot of things. And, I mean, I'm sure you guys would agree that some of the older roguelikes are so alienating. You show anybody those games and even try to explain to them why they're good, and they will not touch them. Roguelikes are amazing. They're fucking amazingly fun games. Endless great games. Yet not that many people play them. And there's a reason. It's just because they're very alienating, because they're so specific and they don't usually look that pretty. And the rules are usually really hardcore and hard to understand to a majority of people. And when approaching that idea, I would really love to be able to bring some element of this great, great design to a wider audience in some way. I mean, Desktop Dungeon even Dungeons of Dreadmore, everybody seemed to really just glom onto it either way, and I was pretty wrong, thinking that, not that many people are going to be into roguelikes. But that was my major focus in the beginning. Was it would be really cool to make something. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, like it'd be really cool to make a roguelike my wife could play and enjoy, and I was able to do that, and I feel good about it. But I definitely think that in order to progress in any formula, in any genre, you need to experiment and pick apart and rebuild and grow and experiment with different formulas in order to make it grow. And I'm not a fan of taking something and defining it very specifically as what it is and then locking it down and saying that this is it. Don't deviate from this, or it's not this and it's not good.
You're pretty much preaching to the choir here. Embarking on the doing this podcast is that we're playing a different roguelike every 2 weeks, and we're all hard roguelike heads and still find it hard to get into each new game because they are alienating, they are filled with user interface issues, they are hard to get mentally.
Yeah, honestly, I think this is going to be, it's probably going to upset people. I honestly think one of the reasons why they're so alienating in the way they are is because they're made by programmers. Roguelikes are usually things that can be made by just a programmer and not a designer or an artist. And I do think that strict programmers who have a dominant programmer mind don't think about those other things and don't think that they're needed because the tools are in place, the logic is in place, the game is good, and that's it. They don't think about ease of use or story or general theme or anything else like that. It's just it's just a logical setup. There's the math is there and the structure is there and the generation is there and it's all in place and it's fun enough and that's it. And I think you'd find that. I think the majority of roguelikes are probably made by programmers. And it's not necessarily that horrible. I mean, obviously, roguelikes are really good regardless, but I do think that's probably one of the main reasons why they're not that accessible to a wider audience. It's just the frame of mind going into a design like that is pretty alienating when it comes from somebody who's just logic-driven and not really caring about, how it looks and feels. And to a wider audience. I love programmers.
The one area, and I think the item design is absolutely brilliant, and it kind of handles this problem I have with a lot of roguelikes where there's just too much junk. And what you do instead here is the items kind of effectively make each game play differently, because you can have of the particular upgrade items, you can have as many as you want, and you end up with an incredibly different looking Isaac every time. A mini mushroom virus Isaac's going to look completely different from a Roid Rage, Diabolic Pack Isaac, and so on. And when you mentioned the tarot cards earlier, that was possibly, I think you tried to get that idea, and it's possibly the weakest of all the item types, simply because I have to, every time I get a tarot card, go to the wiki, look it up, and go,
oh, yeah.
What does this do?
For sure. That was a dilemma. I mean, obviously, there's some major shortcomings in the game in different aspects, so stuff like that, which is going to happen. And maybe if I had a few more months, I might be able to improve on the cards. But no, I knew it was a problem because I'd have Tommy or my wife yelling from the living room, "What's death do?"
And death's the easiest one.
Yeah. It's like, fuck. And I should have probably explained it. Yeah, I should do that. The titles aren't at all literal, like the pills are. You know what those do. Those are pretty literal, but then it's one of those situations where, for me, the cards made sense, because I know the cards. And I had a general idea of what they would do, because there's a reason why, obviously death is easy, it's called the kills things, it's death. But something like the High Priestess, for me that was the obvious mom card to summon the mom, because it's like a cold religious character in the tarot. That's not going to translate for anybody else, and I should have known that, and I didn't. It's just something I didn't think about, and I probably should have improved upon, definitely. But shit happens.
Oddmund, I just wanted your thoughts on things, because you've actually played the game spoiler-free, haven't you?
Yeah, that was one thing I liked a lot about it. You can play it without spoiling yourself at all, and just experiencing the game and discovering what the stuff does. And it's not so simple that it's obvious, but you don't need to be spoiled. And I have a text file where I write down the tarot cards does and stuff like that, and it works excellent. And it's fun. Instead of like an attack where you have to you really have to play it a lot before you can understand anything, unless you spoil yourself.
Something to not explaining things to, which I don't think I talk enough about. But there's a reason why I don't explain, a lot, and it's to create the magic, and it's to the undefined magic of the game and make the game feel more alive and more endless. I do hope that most people go in spoiler free, and I know that a lot of people will read the wiki and go through it and check out all the items and spoil themselves. But when designing the game, I hope that the majority don't, because there's a magic that I'm trying to create with the design. Requires no spoilers, but for me, there's an element of I like memorizing things, and there was something about that too. Like I like being able to associate things with images, like upgrades and items and whatever else. And I'd hope that other people might find it interesting enough too for me not to put a bunch of information there each time. I just wanted to avoid information. It just seemed boring. I wanted to just try to do it with icons, and originally I didn't even have the names of the cards or the names of the pills, but I ended up putting those in for just ease of use. And actually, after talking about this, I might put the secondary item information for tarot cards in, because it does seem more user-friendly. And it's not exactly what I wasn't trying to get everybody to just memorize. I realize that might be harder for more people to do. Specifically, there's like 21 cards. So, 22?
22.
All the cards make sense if you know about the tarot cards. They make sense, like the tower is bombs and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. They make sense for me. Yeah, because I know the cards. But, yeah, I don't think they make sense for a majority at all.
In the game, you've made the graphics and the game design. And how much of the work was the game design, and how much of the work was the graphics?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say more work went into the graphics than the design. It's really hard to figure that out, because when I'm designing something, the whole time I'm designing it, even as the idea comes, I'm drawing and writing stuff down, and it doesn't ever leave. It's something that I keep. When I'm working on something, I've got my tablet by my bed, and if I wake up and I have an idea, I write it down, or I usually go to get ready to go to sleep by just writing ideas down, so I get them all out, because if I don't, then I'll usually just stay up thinking about them. But so there's a lot of work in the design, just making it work and going through and making sure there's no holes. But there's also a shitload of work, obviously, in the graphics department. But it's hard to say which one has more, because it seems like ideas are just effortless, and it seems like physical work, labor of drawing things is there. You remember it more. But it might be 50-50.
Let me rephrase the question. Which of these roles do you identify more with?
As a designer versus an artist?
Yeah.
I identify more as a designer. I grew up as an artist, but I do think I'm a better designer than I am an artist. I could really improve on my art. It's one of those things where you can't, you put in time. If I put all my effort into art for a year, then my design skills are going to lack, because I won't, push as much. I don't have as much time to experiment with my art enough in order to get better, because I usually just do it to get the job done. But yeah, I definitely do identify more. I identify as both. I'm an artist, so whatever. But I also think I'm a stronger designer than I'm an artist.
One thing I would like to repeat what you said. It seems like ideas are effortless, and therefore, it appears as if you don't need to do much design. That seems kind of like a very common trap that many indie game developers fall into, where they say, we gotta have graphics, we gotta have music, we gotta have programming. And so everybody in the team kind of focus on that stuff, and you get so many games which are just, clones of other games. Just because, there's nobody there that actually really cares about design, because it's so much more urgent to do the programming or the graphics, because it's something that you see directly, that you design is more like in the background. It's less obvious to see why it's important.
Yeah, it definitely is, and that is definitely a hole people fall into, for sure. And it probably is that. It's probably the fact that not many people talk about design as something that is a laborious thing, because all it is thinking, and what are you going to do? But I will say that, I try to get across that the majority of my time is spent thinking, and even though you don't see it, and I don't document the time doing it, and you don't necessarily see the product of it in the game because only, a certain number of ideas come through. I'd say the majority of game design is all in your head when you're designing something, and that's usually what makes a game good, is how much obsessive thinking you do and problem solving you do in your head in order to process it all. And there's also the idea of being able to tie in the game's theme and story into the game's design is a bit of a challenge, and probably one of the most fun parts for me. Trying to, I try my best, especially after Meat Boy, was something I started to try with Meat Boy, telling a story through the game and telling a story through gameplay and your actions, which is it's a very challenging thing to do, but I like being able to, I guess you could say, flavor or like pepper the game with themes and story without literal storytelling. Like when you pick up Mom's lipstick and you put it on in the game, it's giving you a major chunk of a, quote, story. It's filling you in on some aspect of the game's theme and story without telling you the story, if that makes sense. And or the idea of the fact that you're fighting off very similar to Isaac. They look like Isaac. What is that? Is it interpretations of himself? Is he fighting himself? Is he fighting his brothers and sisters? If so, that's putting a story together in your head as well. And it's just like, I don't even know what you call it. It's just themes and storytelling through the game's design. Something I find really interesting and put a lot of effort into trying to make it cohesive. And I guess you can say that's design.
There's one thing I've been wondering. You may have said something about it somewhere else, but how old is Isaac supposed to be? Or does he have a definite age?
I don't think he does. I don't know how old he should be. I don't know. I really don't know. I guess it's best to leave it mysterious. I find that it's important to not define it, to keep as much stuff undefined as possible, because once you start locking everything down and overly explaining things like age and whatever else, it usually starts to boil the idea down, and it's never a good thing. It's like what they did with the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, because when I play Isaac, I sort of imagine myself into it. Like I think of him as 3 years old, perhaps, or something like that, because that was when I was a only child, and it resonates with me if he was 3 years old.
Yeah, I mean, then that's why that sort of stuff is important, to make sure that, and it's another one of the reasons why I never give answer for anything in the game, really. It's open to interpretation, and I try, I talk about my inspirations, but I don't talk about the definitive answers of the game, because there are none. Like, in all honesty, the final ending of the game, which I don't know if you guys have seen because you haven't finished everything yet, but the final ending of the game ends with a lot of questions. And those are all questions that I was posing upon myself, because when making the game, I had all these ideas that meant something to me, but they didn't always connect. And it took a while for me to just be okay with that, be okay with the fact that I wasn't going to give a definitive answer to even myself when making this, because I think it would make the game more interesting, and I think it would make the experience for me as a designer more interesting to not have a definitive answer for the game's ending. And that's one of the reasons why I just keep it open-ended, because it keeps it more interesting for me as well. Keeps me in the dark and keeps me questioning my own reasons why I do things. Just keeps things interesting overall. Makes things feel more improvised.
One of the highlights of the game for me that actually we didn't mention at all was the music, which I think is really superb. And I was wondering, like, how much of that music. I mean, I know it was made by Danny B, but did he have like total creative control, or were you also have like, I want for this level, I kind of wanted to have this creepy music and so on.
Me and Danny have worked together for a while, and we work really well together, and our relationship has gotten better over time too, and I think we understand how we both work creatively. And with Danny, with Isaac, it was basically go on Skype, and I just explained to him, not in great detail of the whole story or whatever else, but more along the lines of just feelings and thoughts and the basic themes of the game that I want to come across in the music, and then he just picks up on those themes and puts them in. There's a lot of subtlety to the music too that not many people notice. Like there's a lot of touches on, like there's a choir boy in I think the cave track, which not everybody hears, which is it's pretty haunting, and it really works really well with the game. There's a lot of religious sounding stuff, and it all just goes so well together. And with him, it's just basically this is the basic feeling. You take it where you want to take it. I'm not a musician, so he knows what he's doing, and I let him do what he's doing, and that's it. We work so well together. I think it's usually there's very rarely edits. I think there was only like one edit in this that was a slight miss, and that was just like at the title music, which I wanted it to be a more sad, and ended up. We used it. It's not many people know this, but the credits music was actually the title screen music, and the credits music has more of like an edge to it. It almost sounds like Duke Nukem. There's like an edge to it, and I wanted the game to start out more like melancholy. So then we flipped those two. So we work really well together. So it's a fun process, and it's also inspiring for me to get the music, and then I can usually bounce off the music and put more imagery and stuff in that I'm feeling from what I'm hearing. So it works well.
I really loved all the little touches that really made me feel like it's like for even this little stuff that you think nobody's gonna care about, like when you walk into the arcade room, suddenly you see this, you hear the I think it's called sacrificial, the music, and suddenly it's like a chip tune.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just so cool.
It's important. There's a lot of little details too, and there's even like an Easter egg once you beat the game 10 times, music-wise, for the credits, which is really cool. That Danny had the idea for it. He was like, "We need to put this in somewhere." I'm like, okay, well, how about we beat the game 10 times and it becomes the credit music, and it's really cool. I like that part too. And there's a lot of attention to detail. You want to put as much detail as you can in the game because it makes the game feel alive.
Yeah. And even though not everybody is going to notice it, or even just a minority of players are going to notice it, the ones that are going to notice it are going to think that that's the kind of for them, just for the people who made it that far and noticed these little details.
Yeah, and it's like you said, when playing on spoil, it's like the magic of the game, because you discover one little detail, and there has to be a lot more here for me to discover, and you play it more and more and more.
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from Animal Crossing. The magic that they had with that game that felt endless. I played it for like a month with my wife, and then I made the mistake of looking in the guide, and it completely destroyed the game. Completely. Just destroyed my world. Like, I never played it again after that, because then I knew the possibilities. It's the same thing with World of Warcraft. Like, I got into World of Warcraft for a while because of the magic. Because if you don't look at any spoiler lists, it becomes this unfolding journey that feels endless, and that's important in games. But once you spoil yourself, it just kills it. Like, once I knew the probability thing in World of Warcraft, I stopped playing. It's like, I don't like things boiled down to a formula. I think that's important in games.
Exactly how I feel as well. That's the way I play games. I think it's not very common for roguelike players.
Yeah, I play games the same way too. I want the designer's idea, the magic. I want that too. I want to experience it. I try to always avoid spoilers, and I've never bought a game guide ever. And usually, if I'm ever looking up guides on GameFAQs or something, it's because I just want to do all the fatalities in Mortal Kombat. How the hell am I supposed to do those without looking? And it's funny, the last game that I bought, that I returned right away after, I bought Mortal Kombat, and me and my cousin played it for like a few seconds, and it was like, okay, I'd rather play Street Fighter. And put it down, and then started looking up the fatalities online so we could do them. Then got bored of that, and then just went to YouTube and watched all the fatalities in the game. But, yeah.
It's kind of fitting, I think maybe in like 10 years, you won't even get the game, you just get the video. It's even more streamlined.
Beating a game on YouTube. There's countless games that I've beaten on YouTube that I never have to experience because I've beaten it on YouTube. And I think that's almost a legitimate way to play games these days, because a lot of games are really boiled down to just a few cinematic qualities and aspects of the game, so you can usually just see it played out. Sadly, I think I beat the last, God, what do they call them? Tale of Tales. They can make independent games. They made,
adventure games.
Yeah. Their last game I beat it on YouTube. I didn't ever play it. But it was legitimately beaten on YouTube. I don't think I needed to experience much more than I saw, sadly.
I'm actually one of the people who do not mourn the death of adventure games. Or at least not the point-and-click adventure games. I despise them.
I hate those games. I would really love it if there was some sort of reinvention of it, though, because I'm positive that it could probably be reinvented pretty well. I'm pretty sure Zack and Wiki was the closest to a reinvention of it, but they had more hands-on, puzzle solving. But I don't like those games.
Those games, but I think they're more fun to play when you're more than one person. Play it with a friend or something. You can discuss what to do.
Day of the Tentacle is really good. I mean, that was, I think, the tops for those kind of games. Day of the Tentacle was really fucking, but that's about it.
Which other games would you say that you really appreciate from recent time? Like your current favorite games?
There's so many games I play, it's hard to remember. I like a lot of games. Shadow of the Colossus is a big one. It's something that probably a lot of people mention. I am not too original in terms of games that I really like that others don't. I always think that sounds kind of lame, but I love Shadow of the Colossus. I think it's really, really great. I think it's a great stepping stone for mainstream games because it has a lot going on there in terms of depth that just doesn't go. It just doesn't end with gameplay. It just doesn't end with story. It just goes together so seamlessly, and there's a lot of experimentation there that I could really appreciate. I like Beautiful Joe a lot, and I liked it because of its gameplay only. I really like Beautiful Joe. I think Beautiful Joe is better than Mega Man. I don't think it gets enough credit. I think it was on Mega Man in a lot of ways, and I think it improved upon it. I thought it was really good. I really like Beautiful Joe. I like Katamari a lot. The first Katamari was great. It was really, really great. Very, very original and unique. Pushed boundaries for sure and made its own genre. Spy Party, which probably, I guess not many people have played because it's not out, but Spy Party is another genre-making game which is really amazing that I played recently. It's really good, and hopefully it comes out so people can play it. It's very fun. I really love Spelunky a lot. It's probably one of my favorite indie games. I play it a lot. I've been playing the Xbox version. I've been testing the Xbox version for them. It's really fun. It's like a beefed up version of the original, which is just more rich and deep, which is great. And I like all the classic indie games like Braid and World of Goo and all that good stuff. I'm trying to think of anything. I'm sure more will come to mind as I go, but I really like Stalker a lot. That's like my favorite first-person shooter as of late. It had its flaws, but I really, really, really like that game. It's a great game.
You've been I've read that you said you've been making games for about 10 years now, or I guess maybe making game commercially for about 10 years now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. How is it? Let's see. Let's do the math here. First game I made first game I started. That actually sold was Gish. I started that in 2003, so that's like 9 years almost. But I was playing around with the idea of making games in 2000. But they weren't really games, but I was kind of edging into it there. It took a few years for me to really get into games.
And how did you get into it? How did you start making Gish?
Well, I started out, so I made the transition from comics. So I was doing independent comics, and there's a major parallel with in the early 90s, there was a lot of, they call them zines. They're like independently produced mini comics or booklets, and it was a cool thing to do in the early 90s. Before the internet really took over. And it was essentially like something that people who made websites and like to write or do comics would do and distribute. And I was really into that. And I made shitloads of comics through, between the ages of like 14 and 18. And when I hit 19, I started getting rejected. I tried to like branch out and submit my work at different companies to get it published, but they said my work was too weird or too adult. And I couldn't get it published, and it was a major turning point in my life getting that kind of rejection, because I lashed out in the opposite way, like if you're not gonna help me get published, then I'm gonna have to do this all myself, and the only way I could do it was through the internet. So I ended up learning basic web design and Flash and a bunch of other stuff in like 99 after I got out of high school, and I started putting up all my work online, and the comics turned into, like, once I learned how to like do click next to turn the page, basic interactivity in Flash, and I kind of pushed into, I started making basic interactive Flash stuff, and then that turned into like slightly more interactive Flash stuff, and by like 2000, 2001, I started realizing that I suck at programming, and it's just not something that I can talking to programming friends and asking if they want to make games, and I started prototyping basic games, and by 2003, there was a year where I actually gave up art, and because I needed to just make money, and I got a job as an animal control officer. And I did that for a year, and then I got fired. And when I got fired, it was kind of like another turning point where I needed to either try to make a living off of my art or just get a job somewhere. And I decided I would try to make a living off my art one more time. And again, I was hesitant because of the rejection I faced in the past. But I decided to do it, and I found this company who happened to just be like a block down from where I lived, and they were called Chronic Logic, and they made independent games, or a game. And the game that they made was called Bridge Construction Set, or Bridge Builder, and it was this game that I had played, that kids on the forums that I had made on my website were all playing, and I knew, and I thought it was really cool. And I didn't really fully understand independent games at all then. I knew, even though I was kind of making independent games, I didn't realize how they worked or the whole scene. And there was a very, very tiny, tiny scene. Like back in 2003, the IGF had like maybe 50 submissions a year, and they were still around. So that's the Independent Games Festival, if you guys don't know. So they kind of turned me on to all this. Like they turned me on to the independent scene. They turned me on to the IGF and all these different, very, very crude back then independent games that were being made. I thought it was the fucking coolest thing ever. I thought it was great. I just thought it was amazing that so many people could kind of make a living off of doing this cool stuff, and I wanted in on it. And I worked with them for a few months, and then I pitched the idea of Gish, and we worked on that for like 6 to 8 months and released it. And then in 2005, it ended up winning the grand prize in the age, and that kind of locked me down, where it was like, okay, well, it seems like I'm pretty okay at this, and I feel like I have a voice in some way here. And it seemed so exciting because not that many people were doing it, and it seemed like such a new art form, and I just needed to be in on it. And I kind of just went all in from there, even though it took until Super Meat Boy in order for me to actually make even a slight living off of what I was doing. But I loved it the whole time, so it didn't really stop me from working.
Do you still have like this kind of dream game, your masterpiece, your magnum opus? At least in idea form that you want to make at some point, or did you already make it?
No, I haven't made it. I have quite a few of dream games, and one of the dream games will hopefully be the next big game that Tommy and I will work on, which we're kind of starting right now. And it's definitely on a much more grand scale than Super Meat Boy, and I really want to push my limits, and I know Tommy does as well, so it's going to be an exciting experience. I just want to be able to get into it. It's still like, so many things are lingering, like this month seems to be going by so slowly, because I've got Isaac stuff that's still trickling down, and then this is the anniversary of Super Meat Boy, so we've got to do a bunch of updates for the games and a bunch of sales and press stuff that we have to do for that. But then hopefully once that's over, maybe once the new year starts, we'll be fully in on the next game, and it'll be sweet.
So you don't feel like you pushed yourself enough for Super Meat Boy?
Oh, no, not at all.
You need to take it to the next level of pain.
Well, it's not as, I mean, the Meat Boy experience was, a learning experience, and then the hardships, the reason why Super Meat Boy development was hard had nothing to do with the game's design, and it had nothing to do with it either. It had more to do with the limitations and we didn't set our own deadlines, somebody else set them for us, and those deadlines were a bit unrealistic, and that's the reason why it was hard. It had nothing to do with me pushing myself as a designer. I played it really, I honestly played it very safe with Meat Boy, and so did Tommy. We both made sure that the first game that we did on console, we didn't want it to be too ambitious. We didn't want it to be too experimental, because we didn't want to fall into some holes where we couldn't get out or we couldn't get it done. We wanted it to be pretty simple. And in a lot of ways, design-wise, Super Meat Boy was very simple. I had a lot of practice with platformers, and I think that's the reason why it was so well accepted. But the next game, I definitely want to push the envelope in terms of design in the similar way that I did with Isaac, and Isaac was a big experiment for me. I'd never done anything roguelike-wise before, and I'm trying to grow as a designer and an artist. So I would definitely push myself there, and I think the new game I'll definitely be pushing myself more.
A lot of indie game designers or indie game developers that I've met seem to express the opinion that making game is less about actually making a game as much as it is about a venue for their creativity, and the important part actually being doing something creative rather than making a game itself. I was wondering, what do you think about that, or how is it for you?
I mean, that's the reason why independent gaming is defined as independent game design and not working in a company and doing work. Making games never feels like work. It's fun, and as people, it's their passion. It's their it's not work. It's something that they would probably be doing even if they weren't making any money off of it. And most people don't. It's just something. It's like a hobby that you might make money off of, and that's what it's always kind of been for me. And it's definitely the positives from being a game designer and making games is not at all in the profit that you make after the game comes out. Usually it kind of sucks. Releasing a game sucks. And I think most designers will tell you that. It's usually not a fun experience at all. And money just complicates things as well. But it's making the game, which is so fun and rewarding, makes you feel good. And in a lot of ways, making a game is the closest a game designer is going to come Rockstar-wise as to and performing. And designing the game and is the equivalent of going on stage and playing. And you get a similar, probably not to the extent of a Rockstar, but you get a similar feeling of, this is awesome. I'm good at this. This is so fun. There's an experimentation. There's like a improvisation going on with the design when you do it on a much larger scale because it goes on for a very long time. But it's exciting in that same way as performing, I would assume, would be. And I think that's why it's so appealing to so many designers, because it's their time to shine. It's them expressing themselves artistically through what they are good at and what they love to do. And that's why it's appealing, and that's why I think people really get into it. But of course, there are the people who get into it because they think it's a gold mine, and they're going to make $1 million because they've got the next Minecraft or some iPhone app or whatever, and those people usually will fail. So
yeah, because they got the next thing that was like the big thing 1 year ago.
Yeah, they've got the next idea that everybody doesn't like anymore.
Yeah.
Don't joke about it. The Terraria guys did pretty well.
Yeah, they did. Well, they hit it right. They did it a little differently, and honestly, the Lego Minecraft market is still very open. There's a reason why all the top 5 highest grossing games on Xbox Live Indies are all Minecraft clones. And it's obvious that that's tapped into something that was very much something people wanted that wasn't being done. And so, yeah. I mean, everybody knows you can copy an existing idea and make some cash off of it, but I'd like to think that those people feel pretty empty when they go to bed. How could you be happy just copying something? They did all the work for you. It was not fun.
Edmund, I should point out I spent the last 15 years developing an Angband variant, so there's nothing wrong with copying.
You can tell yourself that, Andrew.
I'll tell you this: as long as you're making it your own, it's totally fine. Yep. If it's a literal copy, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you there. There's if you want to get into literary theory, there's an argument that copying is how you learn something.
Oh, of course it is. That's 100%. I mean, look at the fucking games I've done. Come on. All I'm doing is copying things that I grew up with and then making it my own. That's it. I mean, that's what everything is, though. Minecraft is Legos. That's why people much. But it's not Legos. It's Minecraft. It's everything is referencing something else, especially something usually from childhood past or something that you find, inspirational and awesome. And there's no harm in that. But when it's something that's so literal, it's not only people are probably not going to really like that much, but there's also, I'm sure it's pretty empty when it comes to creating it.
Well, we've come up on an hour, and we've not actually spent a huge amount of time talking about playing the Binding of Isaac.
Yeah, I tried to maintain a ratio of deaths and items I unlocked to have more items than deaths, which of course is a dead-end project, but it
it
really fell apart when I unlocked Judas, because he was so fun to play, and just like the first levels of Judas, when you die a lot, was a lot more fun than the long games, at least for a little while. So
he's a classic.
Yeah, I try to layer it too. In a lot of ways, well, as you probably noticed, like I wanted to make sure that there's a reason to keep replaying the game. Like most roguelikes, the reason is that it's always just new, which is a great reason, and it keeps people going. But with Isaac, I wanted there to be a reason to replay with different characters, as well as reason to replay and unlock more content. And I wanted the game to become more rich with content as you played, and that was the basic goal, for things to unlock and seed more things into, the already rich content that's in the game or whatever. I just wanted to get more and more full as it went. And I also wanted there to be a level of difficulty, because I know that there's people out there who are hardcore and will just run through the game like it's nothing, and then bitch at me because it wasn't hard enough. And so there's stuff in there for those people as well. The game gets harder. The more you play it, the game gets harder. More stuff appears, more bosses appear, more character, and you probably know if you've spoiled yourself in the wiki, but there's more characters, and there's a character that's purely there for challenge that you can unlock at the end, which unlocks 2 more items when you complete the full game with them. So there's a reason to continue to play and challenge yourself, because I'm a big fan of a challenge as well, legitimate challenge in games.
It's kind of uncommon in these modern times. Like most games, you just kind of like going through a slideshow of all the awesome content that 100 artists created in like 2 years of work.
Yeah.
And it's like, like 5 hours of just viewing cutscenes, occasionally pressing the space bar.
Sometimes I feel guilty when playing a game because I always skip cutscenes. Like, I'm the kind of person who's just tapping A repeatedly whenever I see a cutscene start, because I just don't like. I don't know. I don't know, man. Maybe there's the 3D Zeldas I don't skip, but there are not many games out there where cutscene's going on and I don't impulsively try to skip it because I just don't care. And I do feel bad that so many people put so much work into the things that I'm just skipping. But, I even put the same shit in my games. I make sure that you can always skip even the most insignificant little cutscenes. All the dream scenes are skippable. All the endings are skippable, the credits and everything else. You don't have to look at any of that sort of stuff. It's boring. But yeah, I mean, things work very differently in the mainstream when you're talking about big money and crazy investments like that. And that's the reason why video games are so easy. It's business science. They want to make sure everybody feels completely happy when they invest their $65. Big game out there. They want them to feel like they got their $65 worth, and they view it as a movie, because the majority of people that are working in the industry, business-wise, probably worked in the movie industry as well, and they're kind of treating it the same way. And they don't realize that there's the game design aspect, which usually has to do with the challenge, and not everybody is meant to complete every game. I don't feel bad about not having completed games from the NES era. I mean, do you guys? You spent a lot of money on those games, and I don't feel like it was a challenge, and then when you did it, you bragged about it. It was cool. Like, I never completed Castlevania. It's one of my favorite games. I mean, doesn't that show something? Mm-hmm. It's just odd way to look at things, but it just has to do with money.
Well, I think it's also it's a very young discipline, and I think we're still kind of like in the caveman era of game design, and there's still so much stuff that we don't know, and so much stuff just people working out of lore, out of like the last 20 years of RPGs, we did that and that and that, and it worked well. So now every RPG has to do that. It's kind of like it's kind of cargo called game design.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and this is the reason why the independent scene is so important, is because the bigger things get, the easier it becomes for them to be crushed under their own weight. So they take less risks, and the less risks you take, the slower the process of evolution is, right? Unless it's just the way it works. With the independent scene, they have very little risks involved, so they can make the most crazy experimental thing in the world. And it could be a piece of shit, but there could be aspects of it that are really good. And then you could grab onto those aspects and then just building block your way up. And that's my hopes that, 10 years from now, video games are going to be so much more amazing, and I believe that a lot of it will fall on the shoulders of the independent scene, because they're the ones that actually have the ability to take the big risks that the mainstream can't, because you don't. It's like, it seems stupid at this point, but like nobody in the world in the mainstream would have ever picked up Super Meat Boy or Gish or anything that I've ever worked on, even though the games that I've made have done pretty well. They would never have touched them because it would have been too big of a risk, because what if it didn't? What if it didn't do well? They could lose their company. No one's going to do that. So they play it so safe. By playing it safe, you kind of fuck everything up. When you involve money and art, things are going to get fucked up. That's the way it always works, because it becomes boiled down into a business, and it slows things down to a crawl. But luckily, you got a lot of people out there who just love making and don't really care about money. So they're going to make cool shit and push the envelope and push the art form, and that's awesome. That's what they're there for.
And there's a ton of that going on right now. Like you can't compare the indie scene of today to the one of 5 years ago. I mean, it's like 100 times bigger. And actually, and a lot of these people are actually, even if that wasn't their original intention, a lot of people these days actually do get to the point where they can make a living off of their game and do it full time.
Yeah.
A lot more than before.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when I started, there was no such thing as Xbox Live. There's no such thing as Steam. PC games were basically dead. Like, retail PC was dying, big time. Everybody had said, PC. I think I was working around that time too, because I had to make money. And PC was dying, and that was the thing. Like in like 2003, 2004, PC was dead, and it had no future. And then suddenly Steam, pops up and just brings it way back beyond everything. I don't think people realize how huge Steam is compared to like console-wise. Like, it's like over double the amount of users that Xbox has. If you put Xbox, PS3, and the Wii or whatever online, any console online communities, put them all together, Steam would still be beating them number-wise. It's just so huge, and it's just awesome that it's so booming right now. It's just such a huge market, because there's just so many creative people out there who have been and are making cool things on PC, and now they have all these options. Back in the day, you just didn't have these options at all. You couldn't even make money off of Flash, making free Flash games. There was no such thing as a sponsorship. You find somebody like Tom Fulp. You guys know who Tom Fulp is?
Yeah, from Armor Games, or no, Newgrounds.
Newgrounds. He started Newgrounds, and this was back in like 98, 99. Started Newgrounds. He's like the pioneer for Flash games. He was the guy who was making all the Flash games before everybody else. It was cool. And he made that automated websites for Flash games. Then he went on to make one of the first independently produced console games, which was Alien Hominid, which they invested with the money from Newgrounds. Then went on to make one of the most successful independent games of all times, which was Castle Crashers. And this is all coming from a guy who was really not making anything off his Flash games. He was just doing them for free. And because back then you couldn't. And then the whole market changed. And now, like, you could potentially make a Flash game, be complete nobody, have a cool idea for a Flash game, make this Flash game, will swim for $40,000. There you go.
Yeah.
Now, these things weren't around back then, and it's so awesome that they're around now, because people can start making money for their awesome work.
I mean, that's the position I'm at now. Like, I quit my job at March 1st this year, and I'm now making a living off of my first game, which did mostly, like, most of the money just came from Flash sponsorships.
Yeah.
So it's very possible, and it's
also, but the more important thing is it's very fun. Like, it's very rewarding, and I don't think people, and I guess the majority of people probably listening to these podcasts will either be designers or just hardcore roguelike fans, but if you don't know it, if you're not living it already, there's so much happiness and joy and awesomeness being independent. There are hardships, of course, because money, will run dry at times, and it's scary and whatever else, but they're rewarding, having creative freedom and kind of doing this sort of thing. And of course, it's just so cool. And there's a reason why, there's so many people making games. It's not just because, there's a possibility of making money. It's because it's fucking fun to do. It's fun to be able to have that freedom to do whatever you want.
Can I just cut in here, guys? I'm going to have to excuse myself and go look after my kids. People have issues with you abandoning your babies to talk to a bunch of disembodied voices for some reason.
yeah.
So thanks very much for coming along, Edmund. It's been really appreciated having you along on the show.
No problem. It's been fun.
And good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night. Bye.
Good night.
It's interesting that we like the introduction. In the introduction, it said good morning, and now it said good night.
Yes, well, we are. I mean, that's
We've been talking for a while, yeah.
Yeah.
We could say we just edited out like 20 hours.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's the challenge of being it's a podcast with people on 3 continents. Well, it's always we're always going to have funny.
It's a pretty awesome range of accents going on here. I really like this. It's going all the way around the world.
Yep. Okay, well, I'll leave you guys to it. And, thanks heaps for coming along, Edmund. And thanks, Oddmund, as well. I hope we're going to see you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
I think I'm going to quit soon, too, because it's like 1 a.m. here. And
That sounds good.
Okay, yeah, it was really good. It was, I think, one of the better interviews that we had. It was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I try to be as honest as I can be. Yeah, definitely was a good interview. I really like the questions that you guys asked. They're not questions I usually get, which is very cool.
What do you usually get?
I don't know, just basic bullshit questions that seemed like everybody asked the same ones, like, how long did it take for you to make the game? Why did you make the game? Then they ask a bunch of Meat Boy questions. Usually, that's about it. Yeah.